What up? Uncle Benji here. Welcome back to the channel. We got another video for you today on the oral history of my hip hop collection. And we're talking about some vinyl today. One of my most cherished pieces of vinyl, one of my most valuable pieces of vinyl. And this vinyl is from none other than Conway the Machine. The album is The Reject 2. This was put out on Dope Records, a London hip-hop label that was just coming into popularity around this time. 2015, 2016 was when they really started to release a lot of records. And they really had a great design on how they released these records by doing limited releases, really creating mystique and demand around what they were doing. But the vinyl market was still not really a hot market. So it was a risk what they were doing. There wasn't a lot of people doing it, but they had a lot of foresight to kind of see the future of where the vinyl market was headed. You can see this is 81 out of 250. This is a black vinyl. But before I get into talking a little bit more about the vinyl itself, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I first heard this album and the history behind the album, and then how this vinyl came to be, because this album actually came out in 2015, October 30th of 2015. And before I heard this album, I'd never heard a Conway the Machine verse at all. I had heard some verses and some music from Westside Gunn, who's obviously a close collaborator with Conway, who was kind of like a curator of everything that Griselda was putting out during this time and into the future. So Westside Gunn had been putting out some tapes in the couple years leading up to this releasing in 2015. And I had heard his name, I listened to some of it. His music didn't quite grab me in the way that I wanted to become a fanatic of. I also felt during this time, and I talked about this in a previous video about Rock Marciano. This is his second album, Reloaded. We talked about Marsburg in the previous video, his first album. But I talked about how Rock Marciano was incredibly influential on underground hip-hop following Marsburg in 2010. And the Griselda movement was definitely some of the artists and scenes that were influenced heavily by rock. So I think when I started to hear Westside Gunn music, some other artists in the New York area that were putting out some music that was somewhat similar, kind of in the lane that rock had created, I didn't want to hate on it, but I could recognize that a lot of this music, where it was coming from, why it was just spouting out in 2015, 2016, and the couple years before that, some other artists that were making some similar music. Rock had created a lane, so these artists could make stuff that was true to them. This didn't sound really like rock when I listened to the music. Like, it sounds differently than his music, but at the same time, when this came out, there's a Rock Marciano feature on here, Rock Marcy, in addition to features by Makami and Benny on here, who also are artists that I had not heard when I first heard this album. So there was a whole mind expansion, world building when I first started to hear this album. And it was right kind of in the beginning of the streaming era. I don't know when I first started really like jumping on the bandwagon to streaming and it became more of a major thing that I wasn't listening in my iPod. But I know by the time late 2015 came around, I was on streaming, probably on Apple Music is where I first heard this album. And immediately was blown away by the album. Derringer, who produces all of this and was the in-house producer for Griselda at that time, still works with him, but at this time he was really doing everything for them. Had beats that were really just right at my alley. Grimy, sample-based beats. He was still using pretty heavy drums on most of this stuff, but not quite traditional boom bap sound like a lot of people grew up with. It was definitely an updated formula. And like I said, with the stuff that Rock was doing and some other artists, some lanes were opening to really just kind of be true to yourself and be authentic. And the authenticity of this record is it's thick. I mean, right from the start, Conway's got a picture of places where he got shot. you know, there's themes of that through all of his early music, talking about it. And, you know, he had a life where he was involved in criminal activity, but he was kind of getting away from it even at the time that he did get shot. So it was something that motivated him, I think, as he recovered, that, man, I'm going to take this rap seriously. West Side Gun is a guy that can help me, and I'm going to attack it full on. And everything about Conway on this album and how he started to make a name for himself was so appealing. I mean, he had the Bell's palsy, so his, you know, talked a little different, had a little bit of a slur to his words, but it just kind of added a mystique to his voice, made him stand out, sound different. And then, you know, when you hear this and you have the Rock Marcy feature on there, you're automatically like, okay, I really need to pay attention to this. And while Rock, I think, has the best verse on this whole thing, I mean, that's not surprising. Rock, just anytime he has a verse on someone else's album, there's a good chance he has the best verse on there. But there's, you know, tons of amazing verses from Conway on this album. It's only a 10-track album, and there's an intro and outro, so really just 8 tracks, but every track is thick with rhymes. All the guests hit their mark. You know, Makami and Benny were 2 guys that at this time, again, I'd never heard of. Hearing them, I'm like, man, these guys are dope. But it really didn't hit me until some projects later, how dope these guys really were at that time. And for someone like Mock, how much he had really to come in the next couple of years that I had no idea was coming. But I was listening to this album, you know, just on streaming. They didn't have vinyl or CDs for it when it released. I probably would have bought a CD, but it just wasn't out there at the time it released in October. We go into 2016. There's still not vinyl for this album, but I wanted to highlight another release that Dope Records put out. And this is from The Purist and West Side Gun, Roses Are Red, So Is Blood. This is not a full 12-inch vinyl, but it's still a really great release that has some great songs on there. It has a feature from Conway. It has another feature from Rock Marciano, and it has a feature from Makami. So when I saw that they were putting this up on vinyl, I was at the point, by 2016, I was buying quite a bit of vinyl. The market still hadn't really taken off where stuff was becoming valuable, even rare stuff. But this was something I was like, man, I need to buy this. So in January, I bought 2 copies of this. I bought a black one and I bought a red one. This is the black one that I'm holding. I'll explain a little bit why I just have that one right now. But later in the spring, they decided to release Reject 2 through Dope Records, the same London label that put this one out with The Purist, a London producer. And crazily enough, when this album, I just dug up some old receipts and posted them to Twitter a week or 2 ago. I also bought 2 copies of this album, a black copy and a white copy. Both of these copies were purchased for less than 20 euros. One was like 15, one was like 17 euros. And they were extremely limited releases. I can't remember the number on this. This was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, 250. So 250 on this, on the white. I don't know how many they put out, but really limited releases. And even though vinyl wasn't taking off and being worth a lot of money at this time, I saw the price they were charging. I saw how limited they were. And I just said, like, this is a good idea to buy both of these, the white and the black. So, you know, after that, I have 2 copies of this. I have 2 copies of this. And the next couple of years after this, vinyl really started to take off. And these albums were worth quite a bit of money. And way more than I ever expected. And at the time, like, I didn't, you know, have a ton of money. And, like, it became something that, like, man, like, well, I got 2. They're worth a lot of money. Maybe I should look here on Discogs and see what I can do. So I ended up selling my more rare copies of both of these albums. And, you know, that's something that I'll continue to do. I'm not a reseller. I don't buy stuff to sell. But if I buy a couple variants of an album and after 5 years, you know, they're both worth a lot of money, it becomes a business decision for me that, hey, I got one I can keep for myself. I'll sell the other one and I'll buy more records with it. And you learn from this process too. I remember when I sold a white copy of this, it was probably about $500 I was selling it for, but I hadn't sold a lot of stuff. I didn't package it up right. By the time it got to the buyer, the seam was split. It was all busted up. He was very frustrated. I ended up sending him back like half the money he sent to me so that he could keep it and be happy with it. But it was a learning lesson for me that if I ever am going to sell something, I better pack it right. So if any of you getting into vinyl, not to encourage you to sell stuff, but sometimes you find yourself when you do, make sure you pack your stuff up right. Don't make a rookie mistake and lose out on something that you're trying to get to somebody else so they can enjoy it and mess it up for them, you know. But, you know, this album is a really special album to me. It really kind of kick-started me becoming an obsessive vinyl collector and really looking out for limited releases and making sure I didn't miss out on a release that I really wanted. You know, not because it was valuable, because it was something that I wanted to have in my collection. And, you know, over the next several years after this, Griselda continued to become a bigger name in underground hip-hop. A lot of material that Conway's put out that I loved. Westside Gunn's curated and continued to just put on so many artists. Makami's become one of the best rappers ever. Benny had some really good stuff coming in the era right after this. So this really was something that led me to become obsessive about Griselda for, you know, a few years there, and still is artists that I really pay close attention to because they, you know, it's a unique story for them to come out of a place like Buffalo. You know, they have a very New York sound that comes out of the history, the lineage of so many dope New York MCs that really had a way with the words and were powerful street MCs. But to have it come out of a place like Buffalo gave a lot of people hope, I think, from around the country that don't come from the biggest city, that, you know, have their own scene, that are really talented and have stories to tell. You know, it's really exciting when artists can come out of areas because there's, like I always mentioned at the beginning, the world building that they can create. You don't know the artists. You know, not knowing Mock and Benny and hearing all these releases that were coming out in the coming months and years and getting to know these guys, and every release getting more excited and learning more about these artists that were so talented and had been working for years before they got popular. But once that avenue was put up there, and I thank Westside Gunn for like really being a guy, like I said, a curator who made a place, a platform for these artists to share and be the best versions of themselves. You know, that's what this hip hop thing is all about. That's what this channel is about, is highlighting stuff like this that's very important to me and continues to influence, was influenced by other stuff that I got into earlier, and then influenced other music that came after it as well. So that's Conway, The Machine, The Reject 2, a cherished album from me on Dope Records, from Griselda Records. That's it for today, y'all. Peace out, Uncle Benji. I will see you the next time.